In reviewing Photoshop Concepts A. I'm going to cover some of the basic concepts from this one first, kind of an extension from basics. First off, let's talk about the Styles panel. The Styles panel is not usually out, but you can go get any of the panels that you wish by going to the Window menu and Styles. And that puts that over here, and you can dock it wherever you'd like, but this is a good spot for it. With the Styles panel, there are 3 little lines, and you can click on those to change the way these display. So I could see a list of these, so you could see the name of them. Or, of course, you can look at them in thumbnails, like I did, like so. Or you can even go large thumbnails if you wanted it even bigger to get a better preview. You can also choose the categories. So abstract styles, and then I can say replace this list and just show the abstract ones, and you'd say okay. And then you'd just see the abstract ones. Or image effects, and you can hit okay. Or you can add on the list to the bottom. So I could add text effects, and then maybe I want to add some more text effects. I don't remember which one I clicked on. We'll just choose different web styles. You can click append, and append will add it down below. So then you have like even more in the box to choose from. So you can apply these effects to really anything, but to be quite honest, these don't work so well on images because, you know, if I take Mr. Grumpy here and apply this style, we kind of lose Mr. Grumpy, so that's not going to work. This works much better on shapes or text. And so, for instance, I can click on my cat's layer here and choose one of these. None of these are really the right color, but it doesn't matter because these are editable. And then you can choose it. What it does is it adds a bunch of what are called layer styles. Now, layer styles are typically accessed in the Layers panel by clicking on the FX button down here. However, when you apply a style, it basically applies a whole bunch of those at once. And you can see what each one does by turning it off or turning it on. So like if that glow is too heavy, I could take the glow out or I can turn it back on. So there's all kinds of different ones that you can choose from here. That white was being generated from this color overlay. So if I wanted my color back, I could just turn that color overlay off. Or if I didn't like the amount of, say, the shadow or the glow, I could double click on it, and then it's going to bring up a preview, and then you can make changes to any of the settings. So on outer glow, I could change the size of the glow. You can see how that affects that up there at the top. And you can do that on any of these. Now, just bear in mind, it's not the check mark that you click on, it's over here. So if you want to be able to modify the sliders, you have to click on this part of the layer on this Layers panel, on the Layer Style dialog box. Okay, and then of course press OK to effect change. If I just wanted to add that, so let's say I'll add a shape because that's something else from this packet. I can come over here to the rectangle tool, and again, if you're not in the Essentials workspace, you may not be seeing this rectangle tool. So be sure you're in the Essentials workspace. Now, typically we don't draw these boring ones. We're going to choose custom shapes. When you choose custom shapes, your options bar at the top is going to have a drop-down arrow. Now, you'll have a different shape in this box, but you're going to have the drop-down. You can click on the gear to go to the categories, just like we did with the Styles panel. So then I could choose, say, ornaments, and I can hit OK again to replace that list. And so then let's say I want to use this little embellishment here. Just double-click it. And then for shapes, you just click and drag to draw the shape. Now, shapes are controlled up here by this fill button, and stroke is the outside border. You can add strokes to shapes up here, or you can add strokes to shape using the FX menu, and you actually have more control over it under the FX menu than you do up there, so I honestly don't use it up there very much. So if I add it through the menu of FXO here, then it's going to say effects underneath it. Had I just changed it here, the number would be how big it was, and I would have to make those changes here. I could not make them over here. To move it in position, again, you just grab your move tool and put it wherever you want it to be. Let's say we're hiding this little thing over here. Same thing as always, Control-T if we want to rotate something around or resize. And shapes can be sized up or down. They are considered vector items. You can also double-click here on this little thumbnail, get the color picker. So if you wanted to change the colors that way, that's another method of doing that. So that's shapes. You can also load shapes, and it is possible to go online and find shapes. So I could say free Photoshop shapes, and there's websites that have those. You can download those different shapes, and they come usually in a zip file of some sort. These aren't loading up very well here, probably because I'm in Internet Explorer. But let me go ahead and click on one of these. So Flourish Shapes. When they load up, usually you get an option to download. And, well, not that one. Let's just try again. Free Photoshop Shapes. Brushes are more common than shapes, but we'll go here to Brush Easy. I know this one works out nicely. So these nice little labels here, I can choose to have those. I can download that. It's going to take a couple seconds here because I'm not a premium member, but it will download down to my downloads if I'm in Chrome. If you're in Internet Explorer, you'll have the option to open. So I'm going to click Open. When you do, you just follow in until you find the Custom Shapes file, which is a CSH. I usually just move those into my Pictures folder just so I don't lose them. And then when you're in Photoshop, you click on your Custom Shape button, you come up here, you click the gear, and you choose to load the shapes. And then go to wherever you have it saved. And in my case, I have it saved in the Pictures folder. And there it is, Labels. So once I load that, then at the bottom, it's going to give me those options. And then I can double click, and I can create my new shape. And again, it's on its own layer. Move tool can apply those effects or choose any of the styles as well. So that's how you do that. Now, you can also use brushes that work kind of like shapes. And what I mean by that is, traditionally, we create a layer if we want to brush something, because you can't brush on top of a shape. And if I brush on like the ball layer, then it's going to brush over the balls. When I turn off the balls, they're like connected. So that's not good. So you really want to make a layer that's just for your brushing. I'm just going to call this brush. And then you can take your paintbrush, choose what kind of paintbrush you want, and draw. Now these are pretty boring. Nobody really wants to sit here and draw like this. If your paintbrush is see-through, that means it's turned down here where it says opacity. That's how see-through something is. There you go. So there it is. That's brighter. So I'm going to undo those. But you want to keep your opacity at 100. There are brushes that are built in. So again, we click the down arrow and the gear. And then you've got categories. So there's thick, heavy brushes and natural brushes. But to be honest, if I'm doing a brush that's going to work kind of like a stamp, I'm going to load brushes. And in this case, I'll go back to Brush Easy, which is on my Internet Explorer here. And Brush Easy is known for their brushes for Photoshop. So I'll go right back here. And there's some down here at the bottom. So I'll just choose one of these flower, whatever these are. So here's some flower brushes. Same concept. You'll click on Free Download. It'll take a few seconds. It will download to the bottom, which is in your Downloads folder. And then you can click to open it. Again, if you're in Chrome, it will open automatically. If you're in Internet Explorer, generally speaking, when you click on that button, it's going to prompt you and ask you what you want to do. Now, separate from our other ones, our shapes, brushes are in a different format. So you'll notice here, brushes are in ABR format. So that's a different format. I'm going to go ahead and drag it to Pictures. And then I'm going to come back here into Photoshop. Now remember, I have a layer for my brush. So I'm going to come and click my gear and load. Now at school, we have brushes out on our shared drive. So I have a folder in the Photoshop folder that has brushes and shapes for that matter. So when I'm here, I can choose to load up my flower brushes. It's going to add it to the bottom of the list, so I will have to scroll down to find it. And there they are. So again, I can double click one and then come over here. Now this is different. Instead of drawing it, as you can see here, it's like, and I'm just going to click one time here so you can see, it's like it stamps it. I'm going to undo. You use your bracket keys. So when you look down at the letter P, the left bracket makes it smaller, the right bracket makes it bigger. You can click and drag to draw like a traditional brush, but that's not usually why you use these kinds of brushes. These are more to use them kind of like stamps. So I can click. If it's not dark enough, sometimes I'll double click or triple click. And then again, you can add your different effects to your shapes. Or you can do your own if you just wanted to give it a light drop shadow or something of that nature. So this is technically a brush. This is technically a shape. And there's a difference because brushes are, if you make them bigger, they would get blurry because they're like painted on, whereas shapes are like text and they're vectors. And you can make them bigger and they don't suffer any loss of quality. So that's the layers panel and layer styles and brushes and shapes. And that covers a good part of this packet. Now, please note one thing about brushes. On these custom brushes that we load, usually we cannot modify the hardness of a brush. But brushes do have a level of hardness. So this brush that looks really feathery around the edges is 0% hard, meaning it's soft. Some of these here, if I turn this up, you can see here, this one is solid. So it's 100% hard, which means it has solid edges. If I come out here and stamp it down so you can see it, let me click back on a layer so we can actually see what's going on. That's my, it's kind of hard with the effects. Let me turn off. So there's my hard brush, and then here would be my soft brush. See the difference? Huge difference. So the edges of the soft one are then feathered. So make sure you know the difference between hard brushes and soft brushes. But most of the ones that you load up, if I click this flower, you'll notice you don't have that option. Most of the people who created those brushes don't allow you then to change the hardness or softness. Now, something that is brushed on can be erased. Not that you'd want to, but if you brush it on, technically you can erase it. Well, look, I'm like eclipsing here right now. But with a shape, I cannot do that. So if I click on a shape layer and I start to try to erase, it's give me a no sign and it's going to yell at me. Don't just say okay and ignore that. We don't want to rasterize a shape layer. That basically means turn it into paint so you can erase on it. We don't want to do that. So I'm going to hit cancel. So that's another thing to note. So that covers our erasers, that covers loading our brushes and loading our shapes. I want to go over one more element here on this concepts packet, and that is just making adjustments to a specific layer. So I've got my balls here. I'm going to go ahead, and I've got all kinds of crazy things going on, so let me turn off some stuff. I'm going to take my magic eraser here and erase this background, and hopefully it's going to be good enough. You can see I probably need to adjust my tolerance on this one because I've got it turned down pretty low and it's just not getting all the oops, too far. Definitely too far. But anyway, let's just ignore that for the moment, so for the sake of time. I'm going to take a big eraser and just erase off some of the rest of this other one. If you wanted to change the color of something, you can do that lots of different ways. And before you drag it in, you can by all means change the color there, or you can choose to change it after the fact. To do that, there are two different ways. You can change the layer in what we call a destructive way, so it's permanent. So let's look over here. Here's my layer ball. If I go to Image and Adjustments, it will adjust whatever I choose. So if I choose the hue saturation and I start changing the hue, it will adjust the hue, and it will do it to just that layer. But if I hit OK, it's kind of done. Like, it's green now. And if I close out and come in tomorrow, it's going to be green and I cannot turn it back to blue. So typically what we ask that you try to use when you can in Photoshop are what are called adjustment layers. Now that's not under the image menu, it's under the layer menu. You go to Layer, New Adjustment Layer, and you're going to see a lot of the same options. As a matter of fact, hue saturation is one of those. But whenever you use an adjustment layer, another box pops up. I'm going to call this pink. So I'm going to use this to make my ball pink. It's important to click this check mark, which connects this adjustment to that ball, to that layer. When I hit OK, I want you to see here, there's a little layer on top of the ball pointing down at the ball. This top layer is an adjustment layer. And when you do that, you get a special little box that pops up where you can change those colors. Now, what's cool about that is because it's on a separate layer, if the next day I decide I want it blue again, well, turn the eyeball off and it's back to normal. Or for that matter, if I decide I want it to be a different color, I can just change the slider until I find the color I want. Too much pink, pull down the saturation so it's not as much pink. So that's the power of adjustment layers. But they can get very confusing when you have a lot of layers and you're trying to figure out what's what. So that's adjustment layers. You can also do some very simple adjustments. For instance, I'm going to go over here to my grumpy guy and do an adjustment layer, New Adjustment Layer. Probably the most common one I use on pictures is levels to try to make them look like they belong. I'm just going to hit OK. Now it's pointing down at Grumpy. A levels adjustment, you have your blacks, your neutral colors, and your whites. And if I pull in, watch my Grumpy cat, the dark areas get darker. See that? That gray's moving in, so that's changing. And if I pull the white slider in, not the bottom ones up here, the light areas get lighter. So see now how he looks almost like he belongs a little bit more into this picture? So there's before, he looks kind of washed out, and then after, he looks brighter, kind of like everything else in the picture. Levels adjustments will help you make things that you pull in kind of look like they belong. All right, I crammed a lot in there, so there's just sort of a little bit of an introduction to some of the Concepts in Photoshop Concepts A. Have fun.